Hello and welcome to Moving Forward, a podcast by GoodHabitz. I'm your host, Remy Reurling, and in this podcast we will make sure that you will get all the insights you need to build a high-performing learning culture to future-proof your organization. Whether you are an HR professional, a learning and development manager, or anyone looking to give your team a leg up, you'll learn the trends and tricks to get your people learning and moving forward. In each episode, we will invite an expert to unpack some key statements designed to get them sharing their best insights. And today, we're talking about how to develop self-insight. What should people be learning these days, and how? To help unpack this, I'd like to welcome Toebosch. Among many things, he's Head of Insights at GoodHabitz. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to the show. Now, I've mentioned you are the Head of Insights at GoodHabitz, but you're also a psychobiologist. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
What does that mean? What do you do?
So in psychobiology, we study the human brain to actually predict behavior.
Right.
So you look into the different brain structures and actually see with what kind of behavior that is corresponding. So in the front of your brain is your prefrontal cortex, and that's the part of my brain that I will use during this interview.
Good. I'm getting flashbacks to psychology already.
Yes.
But you're Head of Insights here at GoodHabitz.
Correct.
So that's a nice title, and I think it ties nicely into what you have done, right, for studying. So can you, in your own words, explain what this means? What do you do with insights, and how does that tie into your background?
Yeah, so at GoodHabitz, we're all about developing people. And what we believe is that a crucial part of your personal development is insight or self-insight, which means that my responsibility is to create assessments and scan and test to give you insight in who you are. So you can learn what your strengths and weaknesses are or your personal preferences, and subsequently can determine what's the best next step to do in your personal development.
So this ties nicely into our first statement, which is self-insight is often disregarded in the context of learning and development. So it's usually not that big of a deal in learning and development, let's say. What do you think about that? First of all, what is self-insight actually?
So let's start with the second one. What is self-insight? I think self-insight is your ability to understand who you are, what you like, and what your strengths and weaknesses are. And in my opinion, this is one of the most important parts of personal development. We also call it personal development. It's about you.
Personal,
it's not
yes.
about just learning any topic that exists. If you do that, you can call it education. But I think the goal of learning and development is mainly personal development. And what you see is that this part is often overlooked. One reason for that is, of course, that a lot of people in learning and development just focus on learning, and in e-learning, I think that's just a natural tendency. And
so it's a natural tendency for at least in e-learning to not really look at self-insight, but to look at development. And I think it's an easy way to look at things, right? In the digital world, you usually just start by doing stuff. It's really hard to get an accurate assessment of your self-insights.
Yeah.
But that also means that this becomes like this thing that you don't really do in digital learning. So what would your suggestion be for people wanting to get into self-insight at the start of your development cycle?
If we're talking about personal development and developing yourself, I think it's always useful to learn about yourself. What do you like? What are your strengths? What are your talents?
Right.
And that based on that, you should actually craft your job. You should craft a learning path. So the things that you're not that good in, that you maybe need to develop to become better in your profession or better in overall working. And I actually think that that is the core of personal development.
Just starting at your personal knowledge of what you're good at and what you're not good at.
Yeah.
Now, I know that a lot of people like doing courses, right? It's usually fun to develop yourself, but as you've stated yourself numerous times, they usually do that in the things they're already good at, right? But this is also self-development. This is also self-reflection, self-insight. I know I'm good at this. I want to become even better at this, to become better at my job. So why would this be a good thing or not a good thing?
I don't know if that's self-insight. I
Right.
think it's just, if you are in a profession, it's very logical for you to look at the things that you're doing in that role and looking to your peers or your direct colleagues to determine your next step. So in my opinion, that's not self-insight. That's actually more tunnel vision within your own role or within your own discipline.
Mm.
And I feel that actually self-insight is the key to learn where you should work on.
Okay, right. So what you're saying is you're basically identifying weaknesses instead of strengths.
So if we talk about what you should learn, I think it's always important to look at things you're not that good at. Yeah. So if we look into this company and we need to have something that we need to learn together, what do you think? Do you think we're going to learn something that we're already all very good at? Or do you think that people say like, hey, we see that a lot of people in this company miss a lot of structure, so we should all focus on getting more structure in there.
Right.
So you use the self-insight to determine what you need to learn based on your weakness. And you use your self-insight to learn where you're good at and how you can use that as much as you can in your job. So to give you an example on that one, when I started at this company, my only role was to create psychological instruments, which is a very meticulous, very detail-oriented thing.
Just to stop you there, a psychological instrument. What is that in layman's?
Or an assessment or a personality test,
Right.
something like that.
Right.
So my work was very meticulous and detail-oriented. And when I actually created those scans and looked into myself, everything told, you're not good at this. This is not where your strength lies. Your strength is being around people, inspiring others. So based on the self-insights that I got out of my own assessment, I actually learned that I should work probably in different roles. And what you see during my career is that I actually shifted from working very detail-oriented and creating psychometric or psychological instruments towards more sales-oriented roles, where my personal preferences, but also my talent is being put to use better, I think.
Right. But that means that self-insight for your personal journey within the working life has been more of a necessity in terms of developing your role than a luxury. But we see in the market that it's usually seen the other way around, right?
Yeah.
So why is that? What's happening there in the market?
I think it's just what we're focused on. And also I think it's short term. I think this might be the right answer. So if you have a problem, the short term solution is to say like, hey, you're lacking this skill. Let's work on that. Let's become better at it. While self-insight is not a short-term solution. It doesn't fix anything at that particular moment. But in my opinion, if you look into the longer term, what we want is happy employees that make use of their talents. And self-insight can help you a lot with that. So me looking at my personality and figuring out that I could actually better work in sales is a process that takes very long. It takes about a year to actually understand that about yourself and then crafting your job into that way. So it's not a very nice short-term learning intervention, but it's more something I believe that we should all do to invest more into the future of our employees, to make sure that their talents are being used, but also that... how do I say this? If you use your talent and if you work into your strengths, you also tend to become happier. So when I switched my roles and my focus, I actually became happier in my work because I'm doing things that motivate me better and lies better in line with things I'm good at.
Right. But I think one thing that you said, right, we should all invest in this. This is one of the cruxes because a lot of times self-insight or self-assessments are reserved for higher priority jobs, like managerial positions, CEOs and that sort of stuff. And usually at the start of a recruitment process.
Yes.
So how do you think that shift in mentality would work? How would you start doing it for all of the employees instead of just this little select group that we're usually focused on in terms of costs?
That's an interesting question. So what I see is that I think if you look back, like let's say 50 years ago, then learning and development was also for the top people in the organization because it was expensive.
Right, exactly.
But because of technology, we're actually able to duplicate things to an infinite amount. So if you look into assessments and with all the digital innovations that we have, I think that right now is the time that we're able to actually copy these instruments, make them much cheaper per person, and that we're now able to give assessments to a lot of people for a very low cost. Whereas if you look into the past, those things were very expensive. They're very expensive to create one of these things because the quality of the instruments is very important when you create an assessment. And because we were able to, can do this on a larger scale now, I think it becomes cheaper. And this is also the reason why it becomes available to a larger public. I think that's exactly almost the same as learning and development that also has been mainly for high potentials. But nowadays we try to make that available for everybody.
Cool. So you're saying that the digital age has also brought on a little less cost, a little more cost-friendly, actually,
Yes.
benefits to self-insight.
Exactly.
It becomes easier to transport towards the whole company.
Yeah.
Cool. Now, there is another problem that you usually see in self-insight, right? That it's unreliable. And this is actually statement number 2. I'll just read it for you so you can think about that. Self-assessments are subjective and therefore unreliable. What do you think about that?
I love the statement again. When we talk about assessments and psychological tests, people tend to always say it's reliable or it's unreliable.
Yes. It's valid or not
Or
valid.
it's valid or not valid, which is a super hard thing because there's always a scale in which something is valid. Yeah. So if you have an instrument that produces results that are random, then I would call it unreliable. If an instrument creates exactly the right output, then then it's extremely reliable, 100%. But in the middle, there's all these ranges of something being more reliable than random, but also not being perfect. So the question or the statement, are these self-assessments unreliable? I think that's a false statement. The question should be, to what degree are they reliable? Well, I can tell you one thing for sure. They are less reliable than a full 360 assessment where you compare your scores with somebody else, but they're definitely more reliable than doing something completely random.
Right. But that's also the thing, right? Because if they are less reliable than 360-degree feedback, where you ask a couple of other people to also fill in the same questions for you, so you can like cross-reference and stuff, wouldn't that just be better than just self-insights?
Of course, it's better, but it costs more time and thus more money, so we don't do that.
Right, exactly. And especially in a digital age, right?
And especially in a digital age. But what you will see is that once a person, her or his role becomes more important, the chance of people doing more of these extensive assessments, also maybe with other people watching instead of just questionnaire, just increases because it's definitely more reliable than a self-assessment. However, I strongly believe that self-assessments will help a lot of people learning about themselves and are also very cost effective, especially because of the digital way we can do those assessments nowadays.
It's interesting because in my mind, I get this mental image of a pyramid, right? Where self-insight should be available for everyone. And then the higher you go up the ladder, the more tools you need to be more valid in the insights and the assessments that you do. Is that sort of what you're saying in here?
Of course. And I think the same is exactly the same for learning and development. So if you look into an organization, what they will generally do is give everybody access to e-learnings. Some people get class learnings,
Right.
and some people get one-to-one coaching if they're in a very high position.
Yes.
So what you will actually see is that always it's better to go a step up, but also more expensive. So that's why you don't do it for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. So that also makes self-insight one of the more cost-effective things to do.
Definitely. I think it's one of the most cost-effective things is giving everybody the possibility to learn about themselves so they can craft their jobs better, but they also can craft their learning path better or understand what they should learn.
But in psychology, there's also this effect of social answering, right? Where people see this assessment, they get in front of them, and they start answering in ways in which people would love to hear what they're doing. So say I'm a coder, for instance, then of course I would say I'm really analytical, even though I might not be. How would you solve that problem in self-insights? Because that will always drive that unreliability.
Well, I think it's very important to understand when we're actually using this assessment. So if I would ask you those questions, like, hey, are you good at leading? Are you good at this? And
Yes,
I would
of
do it
course.
in an interview setting. Yeah. So you want to get a job at my company. Would you lie?
If it would get me the job, then sure. Don't quote me on this.
Yeah. So probably a lot of people will answer socially desirable during an interview process. Well, what if I give you a assessment to look into your personality? I say it's for your development. I give you a link and you can do that assessment, and I'm not going to look at it if you don't want to. Are you going to lie?
I think I won't, as long as the data would not be open for everyone to read and look at.
Yeah, so I think that if you give people access to these assessments, but you are not connecting any action to it, like you get a raise or you don't get a raise, I think that people will often be very honest, because a lot of people actually love to learn about themselves.
Okay, so in usual assessments, at least when we started out doing assessments and self-assessments, people wouldn't usually just fill that in themselves and get the results themselves, because they wouldn't be qualified to, interpret the test results. You need a psychologist for that. That is, of course, not something that you can do in every company for every person. And how would you go around that? Would you need an expert psychologist?
My answer would be no, you don't need one.
Ooh, okay, spicy.
It's definitely better to do it with a psychologist. But what I feel is that if you have the right language, which is not too complicated and doesn't refer too much to psychological terms, I feel that most people can actually read these reports fairly well. So doing an assessment is not only, we don't only fill in questionnaires for psychological assessments. You will see a lot of people who are reading magazines. You have all these little quizzes to find out something about your personality,
Right.
which I don't agree with. That's always right, because they use non-validated theories that are maybe even unreliable, referring to earlier in our conversation.
Who would you be as a Power Ranger?
Yeah, things like that's definitely invalid.
Right.
Maybe that's even a little bit valid, but 90% invalid. But what I'm trying to say is that I am fully confident that a lot of people can actually fill in some questions about if they like being around people. And they can also read something about what it means to be an extrovert. And they can all benefit from that in their work. I don't feel that there's a real hard need for a psychologist to be there during that meeting.
Right, okay. But there's also the question of subjectivity, right? You get some sort of test score from 0 to 100, let's say. You're quantifying results of things that go on inside someone's brain. Now, you as a psychobiologist, right, you do that usually, but it is still some sort of subjective construct that you're trying to capture into a measurable construct. How would you go about that? What do you do there?
So maybe people will not 100% fully understand what it means, and maybe they are not able to 100% correctly fill out for themselves who they actually are. But what I still believe is that this will definitely give some valuable insight. When things do get tricky, when we start talking about clinical things. Let me explain. So if I would give you a questionnaire to measure if you got schizophrenia, then things tend to become dangerous,
Right.
Because you get a clinical diagnosis out of it.
Right.
When I give you a questionnaire to measure if you're an introvert or an extrovert, and you fill in that you're over here, so really extrovert, but the actual answer is that you're a bit below that, I don't see any danger out of it. You still learn that you're more extrovert than an introvert, so it's not 100% accurate, but still it's very valuable in my opinion.
As long as it's valid enough, let's say.
Check.
All right. So you've been talking about weaknesses and strengths, right? That we'd rather focus on our strengths, but self-insights draw out what weaknesses we have so we can increase our skills in that sense.
Yeah.
This is a little bit of what statement number 3 is saying, and I'll read it for you. Statement number 3, self-insights boosts overall performance. I think you would be a big proponent of that, right?
100% sure.
Sure, but why?
So the first one is something that I explained earlier in this session, and that is that if you're able to find out who you are and what you truly love and what you're truly good at, you're able to craft your job much better than just based on prior education. So a lot of people are in high school and they say, I studied this topic, and then they want to become a professional in that topic. While if we look into the working environment, you will actually see that you don't only need knowledge that you gain during your education, you're actually making use of your talents as an individual. And if you use these self-assessments, you can learn more about who you are, and you can actually craft your job just like I did. And I am 100% convinced that if I stayed being a researcher, I would have been less happy in my job and less successful in my job. So this is an example for me how self-insights helped. But I also feel that a lot of other people will actually benefit a lot from these instruments. So if we look into people from certain disciplines, what you will see is that they often overlook on their weaknesses. And if you give those people the insights in things they're not good at, it's something that actually a manager does quite often. They will tell you that soft skill is bad and you need to develop it. Yeah. And actually then a manager does that for you, but you can also take certain assessments that actually look into your strengths and weaknesses, and then you will get that insight for yourself instead of that your manager helps you with that. So my answer is yes. I'm firmly believe that everybody will benefit from self-insights, and that in the end, not very fast, it will help in boosting overall performance.
All right, counter question for you. Wouldn't that disregard the skills you actually need to do your job? If I'm a coder and I want to do some stuff that helps me code better, that's basically the thing that I was hired for, right?
Yeah, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but I feel that the general coder will like to become better at coding. That's what they've done their entire career.
Right, and hobby.
And what I feel is that you can either use an assessment to get the insight, or your manager will tell you that, say like, hey, maybe you're the best coder in the house. If you're not able to work with other guys, if you're not able to teach them, if you're not able to inspire them, you will never be the best in your role. You will just be the best coder.
Okay, so that means that, if I'm just saying this correctly, right, you would only have like really effective and resilient employees if they focus on getting to know their own weaknesses first before going for some sort of course that helps their hard skills. Yeah,
for sure. So let me give you an example. This is actually from a series. You have a series Suits. It's often watched.
Love that one.
Yeah. So okay, nice. So you know Louis Litt.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is an individual who tends to have very bad mental balance. Yeah. He will explode during meetings. He has a problem with it. His other colleagues has a problem with it. If I ask you, what should Louis Litt develop to become better? Are you going to say he needs to be a better lawyer, or are you going to say he needs to work on that part?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you look at the series, Louis Litt is one of the best litigators in the business, right? So he wouldn't need to improve on those skills. He wouldn't need to go to the courtroom and learn more about that. It's better for him to stay calm and collected.
Exactly. And that's what I firmly believe. And
right.
A lot of people don't see that about themselves. Louis actually needs a real psychologist in the series to figure that out. But what I believe is that we, each manager, but also self-assessments, can help giving people those insights to actually work on the things that really limit them to be the best version of themselves.
Yeah, but at the other hand, CEOs or, the people higher up in the organization don't really see that benefit that quickly. I mean, usually they go for the bottom line, right? For what turnover they have, the profits that they have, and they see this just as something that costs them money.
Yeah.
So what would you say to a CEO in that sense that only sees their costs go up?
Trust in HR.
Very good.
The goal of HR is to develop all the peoples within an organization to have a very good long-term outcome.
Yes.
Not a very short-term profit. This is also the reason why the CEO often hires a HR director, let's say, for instance, to actually help them with that. And I would say to every CEO, pick a good HR director and have full trust in them that they develop the workforce to get a very positive long-term outcome.
Awesome. Very good. This also ties into like the talent that you attract, right? We've talked a little bit about assessments versus self-assessments, which has a difference. And going for self-assessments in their new hires, in your new employees, means that you can also effectively train them easier. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
So in what way would you spark L&D personnel to do something with those new hires? Would they go into a trajectory immediately? Do they have to learn stuff immediately? Do you first let them land or what?
So when we talk about the onboarding of employees, you should definitely teach them some things. What is your company culture? What do we expect of you? And where can you find everything? But a lot of organizations that we actually work with, what they do is that they use a lot of these assessments during the onboarding process. And what you will see is if you give these assessments and you start talking about their soft skills and not only what's expected of them and where they can find things, that those people will start developing themselves much better as compared to people or companies where you don't do this. So what I believe is that if you use self-assessment during an onboarding processes, people will start looking more to themselves. They will start realizing that doing good work is not only knowing the right things and delivering the right things, it's also understanding who you are and developing yourself as a person in order to be able to collaborate, innovate, and all the other things that come with almost every complex job nowadays that are not your core responsibility of coding, writing, marketing.
So start early, start often, is what you're saying.
For sure.
This ties nicely into the fourth statement that we want to treat here in this interview, which is assessments are the key to personalized learning. Now, we know that assessments are really good at identifying your weaknesses, and I already know your answer to this question then, right? How do we go to personalized learning? We'll start there. But there is a link to be made between the assessments that you do and then the learning offerings that you actually get as an employee. And that is quite a difficult one because let's say you get an assessment where you see that you need to be really minutious, really conscientious. Cool. Those are results. Now what?
Check. That is a very good question. I'm going to try to give you a clear answer on that one. So it starts by looking at the person. Who are you? What do you like? What motivates you? Yeah, you can figure out these things with some of the classic psychology assessments that exist. Let's say you use a Big Five personality test to look at who you are as an individual. You have certain skills to actually measure what motivates you. And this is actually where the process starts. Yeah?
Right.
Yeah, we call it personalized. So we start with the person, not with the learning. Then the next step is actually to tie these elements that describe you as an individual and build a bridge between what we do at work. Yeah, and this is the part where we start talking about soft skills or competences. What you will see is that being an extrovert doesn't directly relate to a training course, for instance. But if you use the word extrovert, you can see that it relates to a soft skill, let's say, client focus. Yeah.
Right.
And with this, you build actually the bridge to actually things you can do after that. Well, then there's two things. The first one that I always keep telling people, you should know where you're not good at. You don't like to work there, but people should motivate you to develop those skills, because if you don't do the things you're bad at, you will keep up the level you are right now.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So if you want success, do the hard part of personal development and work on your weaknesses. Secondly, you can use that information to the first part can actually create a learning path for you. Mm-hmm. So if I say, hey, this is important for your role, but I see that you're not good at this, not good in this. This is where I want you to have your focus. And then you, your manager, or an L&D specialist can create learning interventions to make you better at that one.
Classic example of the performance review, where you get some sort of focus point from your boss.
Exactly.
You need to work on. So a personalized learning path is made for you.
Exactly. It's almost the same process, but this is in an automated way. And in the other situation, your manager does that.
Okay.
And secondly, you can use this information to actually craft jobs. As mentioned before during the session, if you're able to craft a job that is in line with his motivation and talents, you will have a stunning, wonderful employee that will be super motivated and super happy and also delivers the best work. So I think that those two elements are the key of being good at learning and development in terms of personal development.
Yes, but you also touched upon resistance, right? If
Yeah.
you go to work on your weaknesses, then a lot of people will experience resistance, both in themselves or in the company. So you need external motivators. That is what I got from your story just now. However, this is usually something that doesn't really happen in companies. The employee, they get a learning path, and then voila, that's it. Nothing comes from it. So how would we go about creating that culture in which you do work on your weaknesses?
Nice question again. So what I think is that we need to shift the mindset of managers and learning and development specialists towards not only performance measurement, but also looking at the complete individual and actually teach them how you can become better. So I've had some good managers during my career who would look at me and say, Job, I see that you sometimes lose your cool or your cool-headedness during meetings. You tend to get very direct and very dominant. And what they will tell me is they put it down and they said, at the end of this year, we're going to look at this and I'm going to rate you on it. And I think that's actually very good because that focused me to work on something that I'm not that good in. And it actually brings extra motivation if somebody motivates me externally. So what I think is that we should make a shift from not only looking at performance, did you deliver on time? Was the quality of your work good? No, you need to create a holistic view of a person and then teach that person how to become a better version of themselves instead of only becoming better at delivering that thing that's asked of them.
And really practically, who would be the owner of that process? Would that be the team lead or the L&D person or maybe the employee him or herself?
The answer is all of those. So what I think that should happen is that managers should always look into this. I think good managers do. If they don't do it, I think that HR is specifically there to train the manager to become a better manager.
Trust your HR manager.
Trust your HR manager or director, yes. And yeah, the individual as well. But the good thing is if the manager says we're going to focus on this, I feel that the individual do so immediately. What you could also do is give people some of these, some evidence that if you tell those people, if you want to succeed in your job, soft skills are more important than hard skills. I also think that makes a lot of difference because you will see that the individual gets more motivated because I believe that most of the people actually want to be successful in their job.
Very much think so as well. And it's not just their hard skills. It's not just their coding or their writing skills or whatever that drives that performance. It also is the soft skills, the way you interact with your employees or what you do in meetings, how you write your emails and that sort of stuff. Though there's always the question of diminishing returns, right? If you train a certain thing, a certain skill, a certain weakness, then you will see great benefits at the start, but then it will slowly die off, the gains, I mean. So at what point would you start reassessing yourself again? That self-insight, is this a continuous process?
Yes. So I think you should constantly look at yourself, take assessments for your self-insight, listen to your manager for self-insight, but also listen to your colleagues. Like people actually want to give you feedback if you're not doing well. So if you're not collaborating in the right way or if you do other things like me exploding during a meeting, for instance, people will give you that feedback. And what you should always do is if other people are hurt by my behavior, then I definitely need to work on it. And when they're not hurt, they're not going to complain anymore. And then you are at the acceptable level.
Right.
So I'm not saying to everybody that you should develop all of these soft skills to a maximum level. You should be in a level where nobody actually has a problem with you.
Right.
So let's go back to Lewis Litt. Everybody has a problem with him. This should be his first priority. If the guy sometimes explodes once in half a year or loses his coolness, that's okay. I don't believe that he should constantly be working on something that he doesn't like because he's not right now at the acceptable level.
So it's good to know that you don't have to become a Superman or Superwoman or anything. You just need to increase your weaknesses, your weak skills.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Though there's one other thing I want to touch upon, right? Because it is a continuous process. You just said so. Though that also means that you need to anchor that process in some way. So you have a self-insight that you do, an assessment that you do. You improve on that weak skill to make it a little bit better. But how do you anchor that process from insight to insight to insight?
I can give you a personal example. So the members in my team, during a performance review or another review, I would always give them insights based on several areas. So for instance, somebody in my division recently promoted to team lead. And what I did is...
Congrats.
Yeah. I rated her on several elements, to check where she started last year, where she is right now, and what I expect from her to be, let's say, above sufficient for that role, desirable. That's a better word. Yeah. Good. And if you do it like this, and you do that during performance reviews or during a half-year review, I think you have a very nice way to keep on always looking at the individual and always look like, hey, I think that for you right now, your focus should be on visibility within the company. Make connections with other departments because you're going to be a team lead. Or I want you to be more confident. So if you're discussing with somebody else who is getting the resources, you fight for yourself. Or focus on strategy because I feel that you're doing your own work right, but now you should think about how it fits into the bigger puzzle. And if you do so during every performance review that you have, I think that's a very nice way to make sure that you're always in this continuous circle of looking at yourself, and every, let's say, half year, reflect on yourself and determine what you need to do to become that better version of you.
So we've talked a lot about self-insight today, but I want to know from the master, what would your key takeaway from our talk be today?
I think that personal development starts with self-insight, and that this is valuable for everybody and not only the highest roles or highest people within your organization.
Awesome. I also think that self-insight, starting early and starting often, again, is one of the primary bits I've learned today. So thank you, Job, for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
That's all we have time for. Thank you so much for joining us on an episode of Moving Forward. And if you've learned something new this episode, just please share it with someone else on your preferred channels. You might just help them learn something new too and move their people forward. Thanks for joining us, and until next time.